You about is something that kind of comes from the VO work that I've been doing for the last 3 years at Vault 501, and it sort of comes out of this whole idea. I call it character first principle, and it comes from this thing, right, that with most of this technology, for sure, the VO and the games, but also a lot of the time with motion capture and on these sets, is that you don't get your stuff in advance, right? You may get a little bit, it may get changed. In games, for sure, right, we will bring in, because casting is the almost like the most expensive part of the production that the production company has to absorb, right, because we can't really charge extra for that. It's very expensive. And so when we do auditions, right, we only bring in the characters for the leads, but lots of actors in for those, right? But then what ends up happening is we will cast all of the other roles, which in video games can be a couple of hundred of them, right, from that batch of actors that came in. So anybody who's basically not quite right for the lead will come in for these other things, right? And then there might be a database that we'll pull in some stuff from as well. But the point is that a lot of the time you'll get cast in a role that's not the one that you read for, and it's not the one that you auditioned, right? So what that then effectively means is the day you show up on set will be the first time you see your lines, right? What you might know a little bit about the game, you might know a little bit about the environment because of that auditioning process. And if you were called in straight from the database, then you will probably know nothing, right? And so in mocap, it looks a little bit more like traditional production, film, theater, and TV, in that you typically will get your scripts in advance, you will typically learn your lines, and you will have some rehearsal and then shoot, but not always, especially not if you're a smaller character. If you're a lead, yeah, you're gonna get all that stuff in advance because they wanna make sure they're off book and that they look really good, right? But a lot of the smaller characters who may have, a page of dialogue total over maybe 5-10 pages of scenes, you might not get it until you're on set, right? So that means you have to be able to take in those lines, learn them, figure out your character, and then figure out how that character operates in that environment. And so in all traditional theater training, you're always taught to extract everything that you need to know from the script, right? Everything you need to know about your character's relationships to other characters, what they want, again, the world they're in, anything, a single question that you have about them you extract from the script, and all of a sudden you don't have a script. And yes, you may have just your own little script, but you're not gonna get the whole script. Again, why? If it's a game, Horizon Zero Dawn, 750,000 words. Right, it's like almost 1 million words. You can't print it, you can't memorize it. It's just not doable, right? There's not one writer, there's a team of writers. Because when you think about it in terms of just time, right, your average movie runs 2 hours. Your larger games runs 40 hours, right? 38, 42 hours worth of playtime. So that's 20 movies right there, or at least 18. Right, so that's just like the volume of it, right? So we can't print that, we can't memorize it, we can't read it. So you have to find a way to approach the way that you work without a script. And so that brings us back to the character first principle, right? So if you have a way of developing a character or characters that is, it's almost like, like when you think about human beings, fully developed, sound and sane grown-up people have this sort of like core center that never really changes, right? They know who they are, they know what their values are, and that stays the same pretty much no matter what they do and where they go. And then there's other aspects of us that varies over the the course of a life and the environments we're in, where somebody, with our family, we might be slightly different in a professional setting, and that's sort of those variables in the outer layers of the human being. So if you can build characters in that same kind of way, where you build these characters that have this core, right? You know them really intimately. You know what their values are. You know what their world point of view is anytime you're asked for it. But all this sort of outer stuff, whether they look like this in this setting or they're a little bit more like that in another setting, then you can take those characters and you can essentially pop them into any game, anything that you get cast in. Now, when I went to theater school like 25 years ago, they used to say, always have 5 or 6 audition monologues ready that you can pull out of your pocket with a moment's notice, right, that are ready to go. One comedic, one tragic, one that shows some of your best stuff. And I would say, apply that same principle to this, right? Always have at least a handful of characters that you would believably be cast in the real world. Now, I'm a big fan of also working on things that you might not ever get cast in simply to stretch your instrument, and I think that's really wonderful and we should do that, but obviously those are not the ones you're gonna get cast in. But you should have at least 5 or 6 that you would get cast in and that are right for you, and again, that are nuanced. And I firmly believe that any character you've ever worked on, that you've ever done, whether you just did a monologue or whether you did a full play or you got hired and you did your homework properly, obviously, they live inside of you. Right, so you don't ever have to feel like you're working from a completely blank slate, because everybody that you've ever been is still in there somewhere, right? So if you start with that, and you come into, you know, a video game or a motion capture thing, you can pretty quickly assess if one of these characters that you have in your library might be kind of right for this, and then you can take that, again, the core of that character, and say, okay, I'm gonna be, you know, Mr. Mouse that I was in this other thing, and then I'm just gonna alter these 2 or 3 things so that that character will work for this new environment and for this context. And so it's a different way of approaching it in terms of the order, but the character work itself is the same that it'll always have been, right? So you can approach it from body first, voice first, astrology, enneagram, however, you know, archetypes. It doesn't matter how you pull the inspiration for your characters.